The NBA has always been a league of incredible athletes, known for its high-flying dunks, clutch moments, and legendary games. But behind the glitz and glamour of the sport, some of its players have taken a dark path, one that led them straight to prison. Today we're diving deep into the stories of the 10 most notorious NBA players currently behind bars. These players once lit up arenas, but their actions off the court have cast a long, dark shadow. From violent crimes to massive fraud schemes, these shocking tales are tragic and will leave you questioning the real cost of fame and fortune. These aren't just any players, they're the ones whose criminal actions shook the very foundation of the NBA. Their crimes went far beyond the basketball court and left a lasting stain on the league's history. But the most jaw-dropping part, the final player's story, will truly leave you speechless. Stay with us till the end. You won't believe what happened. In this video, we'll go beyond the headlines. We'll break down the crimes these players committed, discuss their prison sentences, and explore the far-reaching impact their actions had, not only on their careers, but on the NBA itself and the victims they left behind. Let's jump right in and take a closer look at the top 10 most evil NBA players currently in prison. Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a deep dive into the most shocking stories from the world of sports. Let's get started. While many NBA players are revered as heroes, some have fallen from grace in a way that goes beyond just a bad season or a poor play. In this video, we will discuss the top 10 players who not only ruined their careers but committed crimes so severe their legacies were permanently damaged. These are players whose actions left a stain not just on their careers but on the very fabric of the NBA. From murder and assault to massive fraud schemes and illegal activities, these players made headlines for all the wrong reasons, and their stories are as shocking as they are tragic. We've ranked these players by the severity of their crimes, the influence they had on the NBA, and the level of public outrage their actions caused. It's not just about players who made poor choices. We're talking about those whose crimes were so reprehensible that they've become infamous in the criminal world. These players didn't just fall out of favor with their teams or the fans. They became figures whose actions reverberated far beyond the sport of basketball, changing the way we look at professional athletes. Javaris Crittenton's story is one of the NBA's darkest, filled with a meteoric rise followed by a catastrophic fall. In 2007, Crittenton was drafted 19th overall by the Los Angeles Lakers, one of the most highly anticipated rookie classes in NBA history. Known for his smooth playing style and defensive prowess, he quickly found his way into the NBA spotlight. He played for the Washington Wizards and later for the Memphis Grizzlies. At just 23, Crittenton had the world at his feet, but what seemed like the start of a promising career would soon unravel in the most tragic and violent way possible. Despite his early promise on the court, Crittenton's life outside of basketball would begin to show signs of trouble long before the incident that would ultimately end his career. He had a volatile personality, and his time with the Washington Wizards became notorious not just for his talent, but for his involvement in a locker room gun incident in 2009. It was during this event that Crittenton and his teammate Gilbert Arenas drew weapons on each other over a gambling dispute, an act that led to Arenas being suspended for the remainder of the season. The incident made headlines, but it was Crittenton's behavior and the fact that he had such easy access to firearms that would raise alarm bells for many. Yet even this volatile moment was just a precursor to what was to come. In 2011, Crittenton's life took a horrifying turn. He was involved in a deadly shooting that shocked the sports world. The crime occurred during a failed attempt to settle a personal vendetta. Crittenton had been targeting a man he believed had wronged him, but in the chaos of the moment, he mistakenly shot and killed 22-year-old Julian Jones, a mother of 4, instead. Jones was caught in the crossfire as Crittenton, attempting to avenge a perceived slight, fired into a car where she was seated. The shooting, which was later revealed to have been a botched act of revenge, led to the senseless death of an innocent woman. The tragedy spread across the headlines. Fans and media outlets were in disbelief that someone with so much potential in the NBA would spiral so drastically. Crittenton, once seen as a promising young player with the ability to turn the Wizards into contenders, was now being portrayed as a criminal whose actions could never be excused. As the details emerged, Crittenton's crime shocked the world in its brutality. It wasn't just a matter of a player making a poor decision, it was a violent crime with real-life consequences. The public reaction was intense. The NBA, which had worked so hard to present itself as an organization of responsible, family-friendly athletes, found itself embroiled in yet another scandal. Fans were horrified by the news, and players were left wondering how this could happen within the league. Crittenton was vilified on social media, and his past, including the infamous locker room incident with Arenas, came back to haunt him. People weren't just questioning his character, they were wondering how someone with so much potential could have spiraled so completely. But the crime wasn't just about the tragic death of an innocent woman, it was about the consequences that rippled through the NBA and society at large. The incident was broadcast across the nation, bringing attention to the culture of violence that sometimes lurked behind the public personas of athletes. His actions forced the NBA to confront its culture in ways it never had before. Crittenton's legal battle started immediately after the shooting. He was arrested in 2011, charged with murder and multiple counts of assault. The case was widely covered, and Crittenton was described by the media as a fallen star who'd squandered everything. His defense attorneys tried to argue for a reduced sentence, emphasizing his age and troubled past. However, the damage was done. The public had already decided that Crittenton's actions were inexcusable. In 2015, after pleading guilty to manslaughter, he was sentenced to 23 years in prison. The trial was a media circus, with Crittenton once considered a future star in the NBA. His fall from grace felt almost cinematic. There were stories of his upbringing, the NBA's complicated relationship with its athletes and violence, and the moral question of whether Crittenton's actions could ever be forgiven. The courtroom was filled with legal drama, with family members of the victim pleading for justice, and public figures offering opinions on what should happen next. The legal proceedings went on for months, and the trial became symbolic of the larger issues of violence in sports. Despite the overwhelming evidence and public backlash, Crittenton's sentence remained harsh, as many felt that his crime was unforgivable. His story was, at that point, a tragic cautionary tale of an athlete gone wrong, overshadowing the potential he once had. He was sent to prison to serve his time, and the NBA was left trying to pick up the pieces of yet another scandal. The impact of Crittenton's crime on the NBA was immense. The league, which had already dealt with player controversies involving gambling, substance abuse, and domestic violence, now had to contend with an athlete who had taken a life. His actions became a turning point for how the NBA dealt with its players' behavior off the court. The league implemented stricter policies on conduct, especially in relation to violence. Crittenton's legacy became a stark reminder of the dark side of fame, how one bad decision could not only destroy a life, but also damage the reputation of an entire sport. Crittenton's punishment was severe, and for many, rightfully so. But it wasn't just his sentence that caught attention. It was the devastating nature of his crime and the moral and ethical questions it raised about professional athletes and the responsibility they hold, not just to their teams, but to society as a whole. What made his downfall all the more tragic was the sheer promise he once had. He was a player who was considered one of the most talented of his draft class. He had the world at his feet, and yet it all crumbled in an instant. As Crittenton served his sentence in a federal facility, the NBA continued to recover from the shockwave his actions sent through the league. Many thought his story would be forgotten over time, but for some, the memory of his fall from grace remains a painful reminder of how easily one's career, reputation, and life can be destroyed by a single violent act. By 2023, after serving around 10 years in prison, Crittenton was granted early release due to good behavior. The news of his release reignited conversations about second chances and whether someone like Crittenton, who once had so much promise, could ever rebuild his life. However, even after his release, the specter of his crime would hang over him, and the lasting stain of the life he took would forever be a part of his legacy. Crittenton's story remains one of the most tragic and shocking in NBA history, a tale of a young star who fell from grace, not because of a bad season, but because of a senseless act of violence that ended an innocent life. It's a story that serves as a stark reminder of how fragile fame is, and how easily it can be shattered by personal demons and bad choices. His name is forever etched into the history of the NBA, not for his talent, but for his crime. A promise unfulfilled, a career lost, and a life destroyed. The question now is, can he ever move on from the past, or will he always be remembered as one of the NBA's most infamous players? Keith Appling. Keith Appling's journey through the NBA and into a prison cell is one marked by promise, disappointment, and a tragic fall from grace. Appling, a standout point guard at Michigan State, was a player who had the basketball world watching him closely during his college career. He was known for his quickness, his defensive prowess, and his ability to run the floor. The 2014 NBA draft seemed like a natural next step for Appling, but despite his skills, he went undrafted. However, this wasn't the end of his professional career. Appling went on to play in the NBA Summer League, and eventually signed with the Orlando Magic for a brief stint, but it was clear his time in the league wasn't going to last long. He had the talent, but his character was in question, and that would soon become painfully apparent. Despite his early career struggles, Appling remained active in basketball and played for several teams overseas. He was working hard to prove himself, and eventually found a spot in the NBA's D-League, trying to show that he was still capable of playing at the highest level. It seemed that Appling's story could have a happy ending, a redemption arc, where he finally lived up to his potential. But that redemption was never to come, as his life would take a dark turn in 2021. It was in that year that Appling's name would be splashed across the headlines for all the wrong reasons. What was initially a story of a talented though unproven NBA prospect would transform into a tale of crime, violence, and heartbreak. Appling was arrested for the murder of a 66-year-old man in Detroit. The victim, identified as Raymond L. Sykes, was found dead with a gunshot wound in his chest. According to the police, the shooting occurred after an argument over a matter that remains unclear to this day. What's more chilling about this crime is the connection to Appling's own life. The incident reportedly occurred after Appling attempted to collect money from Sykes, a debt that had apparently gone unpaid. The altercation escalated quickly, and it ended with Sykes lying dead on the floor of his home. The details surrounding the argument are hazy, but what is clear is that Appling was involved in a violent confrontation that took a man's life. What's even more unsettling is how quickly the tragedy escalated. Appling, once a promising NBA player, now stood accused of something far more serious: murder. The reaction to Appling's crime was swift and unforgiving. Fans who had once rooted for him now found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew about the player. Media outlets were quick to paint him as another troubled athlete who couldn't escape the violence that had plagued his past. The sports world, once eager to see what Appling could bring to the game, now watched in shock as the story unfolded. The news of his arrest wasn't just a story about a failed athlete, it was a tragedy that resonated far beyond the basketball courts. The legal proceedings began almost immediately after Appling was arrested. Initially, he was charged with murder and other related offenses, including felonious assault. The case was met with widespread media coverage, and many were shocked that a man who had so much potential could be caught up in something so senseless. Appling's defense team tried to argue that the situation had gotten out of hand, but the facts were damning. The incident appeared to be one fueled by an intense argument and an underlying issue that Appling failed to resolve peacefully. The court hearings were filled with tension, and many in the community, especially those close to the victim, were calling for justice. In 2022, after a lengthy trial, Appling pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 18 to 40 years in prison. The verdict stunned many, but it also offered some sense of closure to those who had been affected by the loss of Raymond Sykes. Appling's fall from the basketball court to a prison cell was now complete, and it was evident that his actions had destroyed more than just his career. His crime had forever changed his life and the lives of those who knew him, including his family and former teammates. The impact of Appling's crime on the NBA was significant, even though his time in the league had been brief. While he wasn't a household name like many of the league's bigger stars, his story was still a painful reminder of the dangers of unresolved anger, bad decisions, and the deep issues that sometimes lie beneath the surface of professional athletes. The NBA, despite not being directly involved in Appling's case, was once again forced to reckon with the reality that its players, just like anyone else, are capable of making devastating choices that affect more than just their careers. Appling's crime also had a ripple effect in Detroit, his hometown, where he had once been seen as a local hero. The city, which had once cheered for his success on the court, now found itself mourning a different kind of loss, the destruction of a man who could have had it all, but who chose a different path. Appling's name became synonymous with wasted potential, and his involvement in such a violent act would forever define his legacy in the eyes of many. The NBA didn't impose any formal sanctions on Appling, as he had already been cut from the league before the crime took place. But his arrest and subsequent conviction only added to the NBA's troubling history of off-court controversies involving its players. Fans and analysts alike were left to wonder how such a talented player could fall so far so fast. Keith Appling's case is another reminder of the dangers of unresolved violence and how quickly life can spiral out of control. His story, like so many others before him, shows how fame and fortune can often mask deeper issues, and how one bad decision can change the course of a life forever. Appling's involvement in the death of Raymond Sykes may have ended his career, but it also shattered the hopes of those who believed in him, leaving behind a legacy of destruction. As Appling begins his long prison sentence, the NBA and its fans are left to grapple with the consequences of his actions. A cautionary tale of what happens when talent is overshadowed by violence. Ben McLemore's story is one that contrasts the bright promise of his NBA career with a dark turn that sent shockwaves through the basketball community. McLemore, a highly touted prospect out of Kansas, entered the NBA as one of the most exciting young shooting guards of his draft class. In 2013, he was selected 7th overall by the Sacramento Kings. Known for his incredible athleticism and three-point shooting ability, McLemore quickly made his mark in the league as one of the premier shooting guards, earning a spot in the NBA All-Rookie First Team. His career appeared poised for success, and the Kings seemed like the perfect place for him to grow into a star. But behind the scenes, McLemore's life was beginning to spiral, and the story that would ultimately define his legacy was only beginning to unfold. Despite his on-court success, McLemore's personal life became increasingly troubled. He had been dealing with issues surrounding his mental health, addiction, and pressures of fame, but it wasn't until 2021 that his life took a catastrophic turn. It was then that McLemore became embroiled in a crime that not only destroyed his career, but would tarnish his name forever. The event that would haunt Mclemore's life and career occurred in 2021 when he was arrested on charges of rape after a horrific incident at a house party. Mclemore, who had been in the public eye as an NBA player, allegedly assaulted a 21-year-old woman at the party. The attack was said to have occurred after Mclemore and the woman had been drinking and socializing at a gathering. According to the victim's account, the situation escalated quickly when Mclemore, despite clear signs of resistance, allegedly forced himself upon her. The victim immediately reported the assault, and the investigation that followed was swift and intense. Mclemore, who had once been celebrated for his talent, now found himself at the center of a criminal case that shocked the sports world. As details of the assault emerged, the media coverage was both relentless and unforgiving. The nature of the crime, paired with Mclemore's high-profile status as a former NBA player, turned what should have been a private matter into a public spectacle. The media didn't hold back in its coverage. Major sports outlets, including ESPN and Bleacher Report, blasted Mclemore's story across headlines. Fans, who once admired him for his skills on the court, now found themselves questioning the man behind the jersey. His reputation quickly crumbled as details of the crime were reported, and the NBA, a league that had worked tirelessly to maintain a clean, family-friendly image, found itself once again dealing with a scandal involving one of its former players. The legal battle that followed was lengthy and filled with intense media scrutiny. Mclemore's defense team tried to argue that the encounter was consensual, but the victim's testimony and the evidence presented by the prosecution told a different story. The trial was a public spectacle, drawing attention from sports fans and legal analysts alike. It wasn't just about the details of the crime, it was about Mclemore's role in perpetuating a culture of entitlement, abuse, and the blurred lines of consent. In 2022, Mclemore was convicted of rape, and the court sentenced him to 100 months in prison, just over 8 years. The sentencing was met with mixed reactions from the public. Some believed the sentence was too lenient for the gravity of the crime, while others thought it was a just punishment. The victim, whose life had been irrevocably altered by the assault, expressed a sense of relief but also disappointment in the judicial process. She made it clear that Mclemore's actions would haunt her for the rest of her life, and no sentence would ever bring back the sense of safety and normalcy that was taken from her that night. The impact of Mclemore's crime on the NBA was significant, even though his career had already been on the decline. He was no longer an active player in the league at the time of his conviction, but his story became another example of the dangers of fame and the consequences of unchecked behavior in the world of professional sports. The NBA, which had struggled with issues surrounding player conduct for years, now found itself at the center of yet another scandal involving a player who had once been a part of the league. Mclemore's crime wasn't just a personal failure, it was a failure of the system that had celebrated him for his talent without questioning the behavior behind the man. The NBA responded with its usual protocol, no formal sanctions, as Mclemore was no longer in the league, but the incident added to the growing list of off-court issues involving former players. Sponsors, once eager to align with Mclemore's image, quickly distanced themselves, further cementing the end of his public career. For Mclemore, the consequences of his actions were far-reaching. His potential as a player, once so bright, was now overshadowed by his criminal behavior. The young man who had been drafted with so much hope and promise was now a convicted felon, serving time for an act of unspeakable violence. His name, once associated with fast breaks and three-pointers, was now linked to one of the most heinous crimes an athlete could commit. In the aftermath of the conviction, Mclemore's career was overshadowed by his crime, and his future in basketball was all but over. He wouldn't be remembered for his contributions to the game. Instead, he would be remembered as another cautionary tale of how a promising athlete can fall from grace. His personal life, which had already been tainted by addiction and poor decision-making, would forever be defined by the rape conviction. As Mclemore begins serving his sentence, the basketball world is left to reflect on the consequences of his actions. He, like so many before him, became another example of how an athlete's actions off the court can define their legacy far more than any game-winning shot. While Mclemore may have once been the future of the Sacramento Kings, his story now serves as a painful reminder that no amount of talent can shield you from the consequences of your actions. The life he once had, a life filled with possibility, has been replaced by the cold, unrelenting reality of prison walls. Ben Mclemore's story is one of failure, violence, and irreversible consequences. His promising NBA career was extinguished by a single moment of violent impulse, and his legacy, tarnished forever, is now a cautionary tale that reminds us all that fame and success can quickly turn to infamy if the man behind the jersey cannot control the demons within.
Glenn Big Baby Davis. Glenn Big Baby Davis was once the embodiment of joy and raw talent in the NBA. Standing at 6'9" and weighing 209 pounds, Davis, with his broad smile and undeniable presence on the court, was a fan favorite during his years with the Boston Celtics. He earned his nickname Big Baby due to his physical size and larger-than-life personality, but also because of his youthful demeanor and the way he carried himself on the court. Davis was known for his strong post moves, grit, and hustle, and he played an essential role in the Celtics' His fiery energy and emotional play were a staple of his style, and he helped anchor the team's bench unit during one of the most successful periods in Celtics history. But what began as a promising career, one that saw Davis earning millions and becoming a key part of an NBA championship-winning squad, would soon spiral into a nightmare. Despite the glory and success he experienced as a player, Davis would eventually find himself on the wrong side of the law, convicted of a crime that would end his career and turn his legacy into one clouded by scandal. The moment that would define the rest of his life came in 2022, and it was a crime that shocked the sports world. Davis was caught up in a massive fraud scheme that was aimed at stealing from the NBA's health and welfare benefit plan. The scam was elaborate and sinister, involving a number of former NBA players and a network of healthcare providers who filed false medical claims, bilking the NBA out of millions. Davis, along with a handful of other players, was accused of filing fraudulent claims for medical expenses that were never incurred. The group would file false receipts for medical services, then collect the reimbursement. The total amount defrauded from the NBA players' health and welfare benefit plan reached millions, and Davis's role in this fraudulent scheme was pivotal. In the grand scheme of the fraud, Davis was one of the key players who orchestrated the plan. His involvement was not just a case of naive action, it was calculated, deceitful, and deeply damaging. As details of the scheme were revealed, it became clear that Davis and his co-conspirators had taken advantage of their status as former NBA players to gain access to a benefit plan intended to provide healthcare and welfare support for those who had given so much to the game. The crime involved not just deceit, but betrayal of trust. A plan meant to care for former athletes who had devoted their lives to basketball was being used as a vehicle for personal greed. The public reaction was swift, and it was filled with outrage. Fans who had once admired Davis for his role in the Celtics' success were now questioning his character. The NBA, which had worked so hard to foster a positive image of its players, now had to face the public relations nightmare of one of its former stars being involved in a criminal scheme. The crime tainted Davis's legacy, not just as a player but as a person. His involvement in the fraud was so egregious that it made headlines across the country, with fans expressing disbelief that a player who had won an NBA championship could stoop so low. His name, once synonymous with hustle and energy on the court, was now associated with deception and greed. As the investigation into the fraud scheme continued, Davis's legal troubles grew. In 2023, after months of legal battles, Davis was convicted of conspiracy to defraud the NBA players' health and welfare benefit plan. The court heard testimony about how Davis and others involved in the scheme would submit false medical claims, all while pocketing large sums of money. The fraud was so extensive that it took months to uncover all the details, and the damage was far-reaching. Davis was sentenced to 40 months in federal prison and ordered to pay $80,000. The sentence was a clear message from the legal system that fraud on this scale would not be tolerated, even if the person committing the crime was a former NBA champion. The trial was a media circus, with coverage from outlets like ESPN, CBS Sports, and others. The courtroom drama was filled with tension as Davis's defense team argued for leniency, claiming that Davis was led astray by others involved in the scheme. However, the prosecution painted a clear picture of a man who had knowingly and willingly participated in a criminal enterprise for personal gain. The conviction was a major blow to Davis's life. The once beloved Celtics player who had helped bring a championship back to Boston was now headed to prison. The sentence felt particularly harsh to many who had admired him during his playing days, but it was clear that his actions were indefensible. The NBA, which had celebrated Davis as a key contributor to its 2008 championship team, now found itself grappling with the fallout of one of its former players being involved in such a massive scandal. The case added fuel to the ongoing conversation about former players who had found themselves in trouble with the law after their playing days were over. Davis's involvement in the fraud scheme also had a significant impact on the NBA's public image. The league had already been grappling with a series of controversies involving its players' off-court behavior, including issues of domestic violence, drug abuse, and gambling. Davis's crime was yet another example of how the NBA's past players could sometimes end up in legal trouble long after they left the game. His conviction reinforced the idea that fame and fortune did not necessarily guarantee a happy ending, and it raised difficult questions about the culture surrounding professional athletes. For Davis, the aftermath of the crime was both personal and professional. His career in basketball was over. The NBA, which had once embraced him as a vital part of a championship team, could never overlook his actions. Sponsors, who had once been eager to align with the popular big man, quickly cut ties, and his public persona was forever damaged. The joy and energy that Davis once brought to the court were now overshadowed by the harsh reality of the crime he committed. In the end, Glenn Big Baby Davis' story is one of wasted potential and moral failure. He went from a beloved champion to a convicted criminal, caught in a scheme that not only cost him his freedom, but also forever tarnished his place in NBA history. As Davis serves his sentence in a federal facility, his legacy in the league is forever clouded by his criminal action. The NBA, which had once celebrated his talent and energy, now must reckon with the fact that one of its champions took the easy way out, choosing fraud over integrity. The question now remains, can Davis ever redeem himself? For some, the answer may lie in his future behavior, but for many, the damage has already been done. His name will forever be linked to one of the most notorious fraud schemes in NBA history, and the story of how a championship-winning player fell from grace serves as a chilling reminder that the cost of fame is often higher than we think. Will Bynum's story in the NBA began with all the right ingredients for success. A scrappy, determined point guard, with a chip on his shoulder and a fire to prove himself. Bynum, at just 5'11", was the kind of player who had to fight for everything he achieved. He didn't come from a high-profile college program like most of his peers. Instead, he played at the University of Georgia before bouncing around, first in the D-League, and eventually earning a spot on the NBA roster with the Golden State Warriors. His path to the NBA was unconventional, but it was this very underdog story that made his rise so compelling. Bynum's breakout came when he signed with the Detroit Pistons with the Pistons, he showed his resilience and ability to be a spark off the bench. His speed, tenacity and fearlessness on the court made him a fan favorite in Detroit. Bynum had his moments of brilliance, quick bursts of scoring, dynamic playmaking, and the kind of energy that can turn a game on its head. But for all his skill and potential, his career never quite reached the heights that many expected. His time in the NBA was marked by flashes of greatness, yet he was always seen as a bit of a journeyman, someone who could never fully cement himself as a consistent, long-term starter. However, his career would take an unexpected and tragic turn, one that would lead him down a dark path from NBA courts to federal court. While Bynum had spent years trying to make a name for himself on the basketball court, it was his involvement in a massive fraud scheme that would ultimately define his legacy in the most negative of ways. In 2021, Bynum's name was thrust into the media for all the wrong reasons. He was one of several former NBA players caught in a scandal that involved defrauding the NBA players' health and welfare benefit plan out of millions of dollars. Bynum, alongside several other ex-players, had submitted false claims for medical expenses that were never incurred. The scheme was complex, involving fake receipts for medical procedures, all designed to extract money from the benefit plan, a fund that was meant to help players with their post-career health needs. It was an act of extreme dishonesty and greed, one that preyed on a system meant to protect those who had given so much to the sport. The fraud scheme, which was uncovered after an extensive investigation, shocked the NBA community. The public's reaction to Bynum's involvement was swift and unforgiving. Fans who had once rooted for him in Detroit and admired his perseverance now found themselves in disbelief. Bynum, who had once played the game with passion and grit, was now a criminal in the eyes of many. What had seemed like a promising career, marked by hard work and perseverance, was now overshadowed by his participation in a massive financial scheme that tarnished his legacy forever. The legal proceedings that followed were intense. Bynum, along with his co-conspirators, was charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud and aggravated identity theft.
The investigation revealed that Bynum had submitted false claims for medical procedures that had never taken place, including consultations and treatments that were entirely fabricated. As the details of the scam came to light, it became clear that this wasn't just a case of a single player acting in isolation. This was a coordinated effort to steal from a system designed to support former athletes in need. In 2022, after a lengthy trial, Bynum was convicted of his role in the scheme. The judge sentenced him to 18 months in federal prison, a decision that sent shockwaves through the sports world. The sentence was a stark reminder that no amount of fame or fortune could protect someone from the consequences of their actions. For Bynum, the punishment felt like a painful end to a career that had once held so much promise. The fact that it wasn't a crime of passion or impulsive violence, but rather one born of greed and deceit, made it all the more heartbreaking for those who had followed his journey. Bynum's conviction was part of a larger wave of fallout that affected not just his life, but the NBA's reputation as a whole. While his role in the scheme was significant, it was just one part of a troubling trend of former players involved in illegal activities. The NBA had long been seen as a league of stars, but incidents like this one raised questions about the players who had once represented the league and the systems in place to support them once their careers ended. What was meant to be a safety net for retired players was being exploited by those who had once been its beneficiaries. The impact on Bynum's career was of course immediate and severe. His involvement in the fraud scheme ended his career, and his name, once known for its association with hustle and heart, was now linked to criminal behavior. Sponsors quickly distanced themselves from Bynum, and his reputation as a basketball player was forever marred. The NBA, which had long been known for promoting a positive image of its players, now had to deal with the uncomfortable reality of its former stars committing financial crimes. The scandal forced the league to look inward, questioning how it had allowed such a betrayal to happen and what steps it could take to prevent it in the future. As Bynum begins his time in federal prison, it's hard to ignore the irony of his situation. A man who had spent his life working tirelessly to make it in the NBA, only to be undone by his own choices. He was once a player who embodied the underdog spirit, fighting for everything he had. But it was this same spirit, coupled with a series of poor decisions, that led him down this dark path. For the NBA, the case was a painful reminder that not all of its players go on to live trouble-free lives after their careers end. Bynum's story is yet another example of how fame, fortune, and talent don't always protect individuals from the consequences of their actions. The story of Will Bynum serves as a cautionary tale for anyone who thinks that once they've reached the pinnacle of success, they are immune to the consequences of bad decisions. He was once a player who had so much potential and so many fans rooting for him, but his involvement in a massive fraud scheme ensured that his name would go down in history, not as a beloved role player for the Detroit Pistons, but as one of the NBA's disgraced figures. Terrence Williams. Terrence Williams had a promising start to his NBA career, a potential star with dazzling skills that caught the eye of scouts and fans alike. Williams was selected 11th overall in the 2009 NBA draft by the New Jersey Nets, now the Brooklyn Nets, coming off a standout college career at Louisville. Williams was known for his athleticism, versatility, and playmaking ability. He wasn't just a guard, he was a forward who could run the offense, rebound, and contribute on defense. His blend of size, skill, and basketball IQ made him a very intriguing prospect, and for a while, it looked like he could be a key contributor to a rebuilding Nets team. His time in the NBA was marked by flashes of brilliance. He had a knack for making plays that got fans out of their seats, particularly with his passing and ability to make quick decisions on the fast break. In the 2010-2011 season, Williams averaged a respectable 13 points and 5 rebounds per game, showing that he could hang with the league's best. But for all his promise, Williams' career was also marked by inconsistency, lack of discipline, and a volatile personality that ultimately led to his downfall. But little did anyone know, while his basketball career fizzled out, Williams was quietly setting the stage for an even darker chapter in his life. In 2021, the basketball world was rocked by the news that Williams, once a highly touted NBA prospect, was now involved in one of the largest fraud schemes ever to hit the sports world. What started as whispers of trouble quickly turned into a full-blown scandal. Williams, alongside several other former NBA players, was accused of defrauding the NBA's health and welfare benefit plan to the tune of millions of dollars. The scheme was elaborate and devious. Former players, including Williams, submitted false claims for medical expenses that were never incurred. They used fake invoices for treatments, surgeries, and other medical procedures, pocketing large sums from a benefit fund meant to help athletes with their healthcare needs after their careers ended. But here's the real twist. Williams wasn't just a small player in this scheme. He wasn't a passive participant. Williams was the mastermind. He helped orchestrate the fraud, recruiting other former players to join in, and filing claims for everything from dental work to physical therapy that never took place. And the numbers? Mind-blowing. This wasn't some low-level con. This was a multi-million-dollar scam that used the trust of the NBA to profit off a system designed to protect former players. Williams had become a villain in a story that had once been about redemption and second chances. His involvement was so extensive that it drew the attention of federal authorities, and soon his name was plastered across every sports outlet in the country, not for his on-court achievements, but for his criminal activities. But it gets worse. Williams didn't just stop at the fraud. What he did next showed just how deep the conspiracy went, and it would leave his reputation irreparably tarnished. The legal proceedings began in 2022, as Williams was charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. Along with other former NBA players like Terrence T.J. Ford and Tony Allen, Williams was indicted in what would become one of the most publicized sports fraud cases in recent memory. Federal investigators detailed how Williams and his co-conspirators submitted over $5 million in false claims, and the worst part, they made it look easy. All they had to do was get access to the NBA's benefit plan, file fake medical claims, and let the money roll in. For Williams, what started as a scheme to steal from the NBA's health benefits turned into a full-blown conspiracy to defraud an entire system that was supposed to help athletes after their playing days ended. As the case went to trial, the evidence against Williams mounted. His involvement in the scheme wasn't just a matter of poor judgment, it was a calculated decision to exploit the very system that had been put in place to help players in need. He had knowingly and willingly participated in one of the most deceitful and harmful actions imaginable. The media coverage was relentless, and fans who had once celebrated his athleticism now questioned his integrity. Was this really the same Williams who had impressed in his rookie season, showing flashes of brilliance in the NBA? How had he fallen so far? But the story doesn't end with the crime. The aftermath of this fraud scheme would have a ripple effect, not just on Williams' life, but on the very system that was supposed to protect retired players. In 2023, after a lengthy investigation and legal proceedings, Williams was convicted of his role in the scheme. The sentencing was severe. Williams was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison for his part in the fraud, and he was ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $1.2 million. The legal system had made it clear that there would be no tolerance for athletes who used their status and trust to defraud others. But here's the kicker. As Williams' case unfolded, the NBA was left to confront a hard truth. What happens when a former player, who should have been a beacon of what the league represents, becomes one of its most infamous figures? For Williams, the sentence was a wake-up call, but it came far too late. His career in the NBA, which had started with such promise, was now overshadowed by his criminal actions. His name, which had once been associated with a fast-paced, energetic style of play, was now synonymous with greed and dishonesty. There was no coming back from this. His legacy in basketball, tarnished forever by his involvement in a criminal conspiracy, would never be restored. As Williams serves out his prison sentence, his story has become a cautionary tale, not just for aspiring athletes, but for anyone who thinks that their fame or past successes will protect them from the consequences of their actions. Williams' involvement in the NBA's fraud scheme serves as a stark reminder of how easily a career can be ruined by poor decisions. Once celebrated for his talent and potential, he now sits in a prison cell, far from the courts he once called home. The trust that was broken, the lives affected, and the damage done to his reputation will follow him for the rest of his life. Williams' story has gone from being about promise and hope to one of scandal, deception, and a fall from grace that no one saw coming. Keyon Dooling. Keyon Dooling was once a promising point guard in the NBA, known for his defensive tenacity, leadership, and ability to facilitate plays. Drafted 10th overall in the 2000 NBA draft by the Orlando Magic, Dooling had all the tools to succeed in the league. Standing at 6'3" and equipped with a solid all-around game, he spent the next 13 seasons playing for several teams, including the Orlando Magic, Miami Heat, New Jersey Nets, and Boston Celtics. Over the course of his career, Dooling carved out a respectable role as a backup point guard and a solid defensive presence off the bench. He was never a superstar, but he was an important contributor to the teams he played for, particularly in his time with the Celtics, where he was part of the 2008 championship-winning squad. Dooling's reputation as a player was one of professionalism and resilience. Fans admired his hustle and his ability to guard opposing players, especially at the point guard position, which was becoming increasingly important in the modern NBA. Yet, as his career progressed, Dooling's story became far less about basketball and far more about a deeply troubling personal life that would ultimately define his legacy in a way no one expected. While Dooling's career continued through his 30s, he began to show signs of personal struggles that extended far beyond the court. Dooling had been battling mental health issues for much of his life, something he eventually revealed publicly after his playing days had ended. As his career came to a close, Dooling started to distance himself from the NBA, and it was in his post-basketball life that things took a turn for the worse. In 2021, the world learned that Keyon Dooling had been involved in something far darker than anyone could have imagined. The story that would forever alter his life and his reputation was about to be revealed. Dooling, who once appeared to be a humble, respected veteran in the league, was one of several former NBA players caught up in a massive fraud scheme involving the NBA's health and welfare benefit plan. But what made Dooling's involvement especially shocking was not just his participation in the scheme, it was the fact that he had played a critical role in organizing and orchestrating it. The scheme was elaborate, involving over $5 million in false medical claims submitted to the NBA's Health and Welfare Fund. Dooling and several other former players, including his former colleagues in the NBA, had been submitting fake invoices for medical procedures that had never taken place. These fraudulent claims covered everything from physical therapy to dental work, costs that had been inflated or completely fabricated. Dooling, once known for his leadership on the court, now found himself at the center of a complex conspiracy designed to exploit a system meant to help former players with their medical needs. As details of the fraud emerged, it became clear that Dooling wasn't just a passive participant, he was a key player in the operation. He had recruited others, using his status as a former NBA player to manipulate the system. His actions were not only illegal but unethical, as they involved exploiting a fund that was meant to help retired athletes who were struggling with health issues after their playing days ended. The NBA's health benefits system was designed to protect the players who had given so much to the game, but Dooling and his co-conspirators took advantage of that system to steal millions. And while Dooling's crime was shocking, it was the aftermath of the scheme that would reveal just how deeply his actions had affected not only his life, but the entire NBA community. The public reaction to Dooling's involvement in the fraud scheme was swift and brutal. Fans who had once admired him for his grit and defensive prowess on the court were now questioning his integrity. How could a player who had been celebrated for his leadership and professionalism stoop to such a low? The media coverage was extensive, as outlets like ESPN, Sports Illustrated, and the New York Times covered every detail of the investigation. The NBA found itself once again embroiled in a scandal involving its former players, this time with fraud taking center stage. The legal proceedings followed quickly. Dooling, along with several other former players, was charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. As investigators pieced together the details of the scheme, the public learned that Dooling had not only submitted false claims, but had gone so far as to convince other players to join him. His role as a leader in the NBA, someone who had commanded respect during his playing days, now seemed like a cruel irony. The trial was intense, and as the evidence mounted against him, Dooling pled guilty to his role in the scheme. In 2022, he was sentenced to 30 months in federal prison. The sentencing was a stark reminder that even athletes who had reached the pinnacle of success could fall hard when they chose to take shortcuts in life. For Dooling, his sentence was a devastating end to a career that had been built on hard work and perseverance. Now, he would face the consequences of his criminal actions, paying the price for betraying the very system that had once supported him. But the story doesn't end with the crime. As Dooling heads to prison, the NBA is left grappling with how to deal with the growing issue of its former players committing crimes after their careers end. The fallout from Dooling's conviction was far-reaching. Not only had he stolen money from the NBA's health benefit system, but his actions also raised uncomfortable questions about the culture within the league. How had so many players, many of whom had enjoyed successful careers, fallen into this kind of behavior? And what could be done to prevent it from happening again? For Dooling, the impact was immediate. The NBA had no tolerance for his actions, and his reputation, once defined by his hustle and leadership on the court, was now linked to fraud and deception. Sponsors quickly cut ties with him, and his name became synonymous with one of the most shocking fraud schemes ever to hit the NBA. The public's perception of him had shifted dramatically. The man who had once been seen as a respected veteran in the league was now a criminal. Now, as Dooling serves his time in prison, the question remains, can he ever redeem himself, or will his legacy be forever defined by his actions outside of the NBA? As he begins his prison sentence, Dooling's story serves as yet another cautionary tale for the NBA and its players. It's a painful reminder of how fame and success do not guarantee immunity from poor choices. Dooling's crime has left a permanent stain on his legacy, and while he may have had a successful career in the NBA, it's the fraud scheme that will ultimately define him in the eyes of most people. The NBA, once again, finds itself confronting the harsh reality of what happens when its players fall from grace. Dooling's story is a tragedy for everyone involved, especially for him. A player who could have been remembered for his contributions to the game now finds himself remembered for a crime that will forever overshadow his basketball career. His involvement in the fraud scheme has destroyed not only his legacy, but also shattered the trust between the league and its former stars. Nate Driggers. Nate Driggers, a name most basketball fans might not immediately recognize, is one of the more obscure figures in the story of NBA players who fell from grace. Driggers was never an NBA star, never someone whose highlights would flood social media or fill sports news, but his story is no less shocking. In fact, it may be one of the most jarring tales of betrayal and downfall in the history of professional basketball. Driggers was a journeyman in the NBA, spending a brief stint with the Boston Celtics. He was a player who showed flashes of potential, but like so many others, he never really carved out a long-term place in the league. After his NBA career, Driggers turned to a life playing professionally overseas, bouncing from team to team in various countries. But what seemed like the life of an athlete searching for his place in the world would soon take a much darker turn. Driggers' life post-basketball would spiral into criminal activity that would forever tarnish his legacy. The shocking truth came to light in 2022 when Driggers was arrested in connection to a series of gun-related crimes. But this wasn't just a simple case of weapons possession, it was far worse. Driggers had become involved in an illegal firearms trafficking ring in Chicago. The details were both chilling and disturbing. Driggers, who had once been a promising athlete, now found himself playing a role in a criminal enterprise that was dealing high-powered firearms to gangs and criminals across the city. But this wasn't just about Driggers getting involved in the wrong crowd. No, this was a calculated move, one that involved a deep dive into the illegal arms trade. How did an NBA player, who had once graced the court with some of the best in the world, end up running weapons for criminals? The investigation into Driggers' involvement in the arms trafficking operation revealed that he was more than just a small player in the ring. Driggers was a key facilitator, using his connections and knowledge of the basketball world to import firearms into the United States and then sell them illegally to street gangs in Chicago. The scale of the operation was massive, and it became clear that Driggers had been active in these dealings for several years. His role in the firearms ring wasn't an impulsive decision. It was part of a calculated, organized effort to make money through crime, far removed from the sport that had once been his life. As the investigation deepened, authorities discovered that Driggers had used his status as a former NBA player to gain access to certain networks and buyers. This wasn't just about street-level dealings. It was a network that stretched into darker corners of the criminal world. Driggers was helping to supply weapons to dangerous individuals, turning his back on the very system that had given him everything. His involvement in the ring seemed to have no boundaries, and it wasn't long before his name became synonymous with crime rather than basketball. But how did someone like Driggers, with the whole world ahead of him, end up involved in one of the most dangerous illegal operations in Chicago? What was going on in his life that made him decide to turn his back on everything he had worked for? The truth behind Driggers' actions was buried deep in his personal life. Behind the scenes, Driggers had struggled with addiction and financial instability. After his time in the NBA, he had a difficult time adjusting to life outside of basketball. Like many former athletes, the loss of his career took a psychological toll on him. The money and fame that had once come easily to him were now gone, and he found himself struggling to make ends meet. This, combined with personal demons, seemed to push him toward the life of crime he became entangled in. But the cold reality of his situation soon set in. In 2023, Driggers was arrested and charged with conspiracy to distribute firearms and several other related charges. The investigation against him painted a clear picture of someone who had gone down a path of greed and desperation, willing to risk everything for money and power in a world far removed from the sport he once loved. The case against Driggers wasn't just about his actions, it was a part of a much larger problem within the NBA community. Was he the only former player to go down this road, or was there something deeper in the culture of retired athletes that led him to make these choices? In 2024, Driggers stood trial, facing serious charges for his involvement in the illegal gun trafficking operation. As the courtroom drama unfolded, it was revealed that Driggers was not working alone. He had recruited several other former athletes to help him facilitate the deals, which further underscored the gravity of his involvement. The trial was long and intense, with the prosecution arguing that Driggers had intentionally used his NBA connections to facilitate the operation. The defense, on the other hand, tried to paint Driggers as a man who was desperate and out of his element, someone who had made one bad choice after another. In the end, the court was unforgiving. Driggers was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for his role in the arms trafficking ring. The sentence was a reminder that no matter who you are, the law will always catch up with you. For Driggers, what had once been a promising career in basketball was now completely overshadowed by his criminal actions. His name would no longer be associated with fast breaks or buzzer beaters, but with firearms trafficking and organized crime. But what happens after prison? Can a man like Driggers ever recover from this? Or will his time behind bars become the final chapter in a life that was supposed to be defined by basketball? For Driggers, the road ahead is uncertain. His life, once filled with the bright lights of the NBA, is now consumed by the dark shadows of his criminal activities. The damage done to his reputation is irreversible, and the lives affected by his actions, especially the victims of the firearms he helped distribute, cannot be undone. His downfall is a tragic reminder of how easily a life can be derailed by poor decisions, addiction, and desperation. As Driggers serves his time in federal prison, his story serves as a stark warning about the dangers that exist when athletes, or anyone for that matter, lose their way. His involvement in the firearms trade is a tragic chapter in the history of the NBA, but also a cautionary tale for anyone who thinks that fame or success will shield them from the consequences of their choices. His story is a reminder that while you may rise to the top, a single mistake can send you crashing down to a place you never thought you'd end up. Gilbert Arenas. Gilbert Arenas was once the face of the Washington Wizards, a dynamic point guard known for his scoring ability, flashy style, and charismatic personality. A two-time NBA All-Star, Arenas was one of the most entertaining and unpredictable players of his generation. Nicknamed Agent Zero for his ability to take over games and his confidence, Arenas was a walking highlight reel capable of dropping 60 points on any given night. He was feared by opposing teams for his ability to score from anywhere on the court and was seen as one of the brightest young stars in the NBA. For a time, it seemed like Arenas would lead the Wizards back to playoff contention, potentially bringing the franchise its first real success since the 1970s. But the story of Gilbert Arenas was not destined to be one of continued triumph. While his on-court persona was larger than life, his off-court actions would soon overshadow his playing career, leading to a series of events that would forever change the course of his life. The turn that his career took wasn't because of an injury or a loss of skill. It was because of a shocking and highly publicized incident in the Washington Wizards locker room, one that would not only derail his career, but put him at the center of one of the NBA's most controversial and dangerous scandals. But this wasn't just a minor incident. It was a crime involving guns, one that could have easily turned deadly. What was a locker room dispute suddenly escalated into a national headline, and Arenas would find himself facing far more than just a suspension. In 2009, Gilbert Arenas became embroiled in an incident that would ultimately be his downfall. It all started with a locker room dispute between Arenas and his teammate, Javaris Crittenton, over a gambling debt. The altercation, which initially seemed like a minor disagreement between two competitive players, quickly escalated into something far more dangerous. In a moment of poor judgment, Arenas brought several firearms into the Washington Wizards locker room. He allegedly placed the guns on Crittenton's chair in an attempt to intimidate him over the debt, which quickly went from a simple locker room dispute to a violent confrontation. But this wasn't just an empty threat. Arenas wasn't the only one who had a gun in the locker room. Crittenton, in retaliation, also brought his own weapon, and things could have easily escalated to violence if not for the intervention of other players. The media storm that followed was swift and unforgiving. Arenas' actions were seen as reckless and incredibly dangerous. The NBA, already dealing with a league-wide initiative to control gun violence, could not afford to let this slip by. The NBA, like many other major sports leagues, had a strict no-weapons policy, and Arenas' actions violated that rule in the most dramatic way possible. In addition to the threat of violence in the locker room, there was the matter of bringing multiple firearms to a professional basketball facility, something that put everyone, from the players to the staff to the fans, at risk. But the consequences weren't just limited to a suspension. Arenas' involvement in this scandal would lead to a series of legal actions that would change his life forever. And what's even more surprising, he wasn't the only NBA star involved in this scandal. His teammate, Javaris Crittenton, would also find himself facing major consequences. The fallout from the locker room incident was immediate. Arenas was suspended for the remainder of the 2009-2010 season by the NBA, effectively ending his campaign and the Wizards' playoff hopes. The suspension was a clear message from the league that this kind of behavior would not be tolerated. But the punishment didn't stop there. Arenas was also fined, and the legal system got involved. In 2010, Arenas pled guilty to carrying an unlicensed firearm, and he was sentenced to 30 days in a halfway house as part of his sentence. His conviction was a public humiliation, and it was a sharp contrast to the fun-loving, brash player who had once been one of the league's rising stars. What came next was perhaps even more shocking. Arenas' future in the NBA was in jeopardy. The entire landscape of his career would shift forever because of that locker room dispute. But his downfall didn't end with a prison sentence, it was just the beginning. Arenas' legacy was shattered. The player who had once been one of the most dynamic scorers in the game and an ambassador for the NBA was now a figure synonymous with a locker room scandal and criminal behavior. Sponsors dropped him, and the NBA's image was tainted by his actions. Teams began to see Arenas less as a star and more as a liability, and his reputation as a leader in the locker room was forever destroyed. Even though Arenas continued to play for the Orlando Magic and the Memphis Grizzlies in the years that followed, his once promising career never fully recovered. But despite the public shame, Arenas wasn't done yet. He would eventually try to rebuild his life, but it would never be the same. Could the once great Agent Zero ever bounce back from this? Or had his career and legacy been irreparably tainted? In the years following his departure from the NBA, Arenas turned to social media and media ventures, attempting to reclaim his voice and his personality outside of the game. He became an outspoken figure in the sports world, offering commentary and personal insights into the game he once dominated. Yet, despite his attempt to stay relevant and in the public eye, his criminal actions in the locker room continued to define him. Every attempt to regain the spotlight was overshadowed by the guns in the locker room. His infamous fall from grace served as a constant reminder of the line between superstar and cautionary tale. Arenas' career, which once held such promise, was forever altered by his lapse in judgment. The decision to bring firearms into a professional sports environment not only cost him his career, but also affected the public's perception of the NBA as a whole. His actions forced the NBA to tighten its policies on player conduct, particularly in relation to off-court behavior and violence. And while Gilbert Arenas' story seems to have reached its tragic end as a basketball player, there's a deeper question lingering. Was the NBA ready to confront the bigger issue? How many other stars were struggling with demons off the court, hidden behind the glitz and glamour of professional sports? As Gilbert Arenas now navigates life after basketball, his legacy remains one of both brilliance and disaster. He was a player who could have been remembered for his incredible scoring ability and charismatic play, but instead, his story will be forever tied to one of the darkest scandals in NBA history. The question of what could have been will linger long after his time in the league, but for now, Arenas' name remains a stark reminder that one poor decision can derail even the brightest of careers. His legacy is a cautionary tale of how quickly everything can change for a professional athlete and how fragile fame can be. Shawn Kemp, also known as the Rain Man, was one of the most electrifying players of the 1990s NBA. Standing at 6'10" and blessed with jaw-dropping athleticism, Kemp became a basketball icon. He was best known for his powerful dunks, explosive plays, and fiery demeanor on the court. Kemp played for several teams during his career, most notably the Seattle Supersonics, where he became a six-time NBA All-Star and a key figure in their postseason runs. He was the quintessential power forward, dominating the paint with both finesse and force. Kemp's high-flying dunks, particularly during his time with the Sonics, earned him a reputation as one of the best in-game dunkers the NBA had ever seen. However, despite his immense talent and a career that many expected to see reach even greater heights, Kemp's legacy would ultimately be overshadowed by his personal demons. While his basketball career was filled with promise, his off-court life began to spiral out of control, and by the time his playing days were over, the world would know him for something entirely different. Kemp's fall from grace was not marked by an injury or a sudden drop in performance. It was a series of decisions that led him down a dangerous path, one that would result in legal trouble, public scandal, and a loss of a career that had once seemed destined for greatness. But the shocking twist in Kemp's story wasn't just about a former star athlete falling from grace. No, it was a violent crime, one that shocked the entire basketball community. What happens when one of the NBA's brightest stars becomes involved in a crime that puts him in the crosshairs of both the legal system and the public? In 2023, Shawn Kemp's name would be thrust back into the headlines for all the wrong reasons. The once unstoppable force on the basketball court was now at the center of a high-profile shooting incident in Tacoma, Washington. Kemp had reportedly been involved in an altercation in which gunshots were fired during a parking lot dispute. While the details of the incident were initially unclear, what was certain was that Kemp's involvement in a violent altercation would forever change how the public viewed him. The incident occurred when Kemp allegedly confronted another individual over a stolen car, and the situation quickly escalated into gunfire. Thankfully, no one was injured in the exchange, but the very fact that Kemp, an NBA legend, was involved in such an incident raised serious questions about his judgment and his life after basketball. But that's not the full story. What made this crime even more alarming was Kemp's own history, one that was marred by personal struggles and prior legal issues. This wasn't an isolated incident. Kemp's life had already been defined by a pattern of poor decisions and a troubled past. Kemp's history with law enforcement was well documented, and the shooting incident brought back memories of his struggles with substance abuse, legal issues, and personal scandals during his playing days. Throughout the years, Kemp had been arrested multiple times for various offenses, including charges related to drug possession, assault, and reckless driving. Despite his explosive play on the court, Kemp's off-court life seemed to always be in turmoil. The shooting incident in 2023 seemed like the final chapter in a downward spiral that had been building for years. So what happened next? Was this a one-time mistake, or had the long-standing troubles of his past finally caught up with him? Could Shawn Kemp, the man who once ruled the NBA's highlight reels, redeem himself, or was this his final fall from grace? As the investigation unfolded, Kemp was arrested and charged with felony assault and illegal discharge of a firearm. The legal proceedings were fast-tracked, and soon the world would learn just how deeply involved he had been in the incident. Kemp's legal team tried to argue that he had acted in self-defense, claiming that the confrontation was not a premeditated act of violence. However, the court of public opinion was less forgiving. Fans, who had once cheered for Kemp as one of the most dynamic players of his generation, were now questioning his character and the direction his life had taken after retirement. The charges were serious. If convicted, Kemp faced a potential prison sentence, and the NBA's tarnished relationship with its former stars who had been involved in criminal activities became even more strained. The incident not only jeopardized Kemp's future, but also reflected poorly on the league he had once been a part of. While the NBA had no official response to Kemp's arrest, the shooting incident revived the conversation around athletes and their lives after basketball. For every superstar who had a seamless transition into life after the game, there was another who struggled to cope with the loss of fame, the pressure of maintaining their image, and the reality of facing their own demons. And here's where the story takes another unexpected turn. Even though Kemp was facing serious legal consequences, his past would play a massive role in shaping the outcome. Would his history of struggles help him avoid prison time, or would his actions finally come back to haunt him in full force? As of 2024, the case is still in progress, and Kemp has yet to be sentenced. The legal process is moving slowly, but one thing is clear: Kemp's legacy as an NBA legend is forever altered by his involvement in this violent altercation. He will likely never be remembered for the electric dunks, the powerful rebounds, or his role in the Sonics' glory years. Instead, Kemp will be forever associated with the crime and the controversy surrounding his fall from grace. His story, once a tale of athleticism and explosive talent, is now one of tragedy and wasted potential. The man who had been on top of the world now finds himself entangled in a criminal case that could end with a prison sentence. It's a stark reminder that no amount of fame, no matter how big, can protect you from your own decisions. But will Kemp ever have a chance at redemption? Or will this be the final chapter in the story of one of the NBA's most tragic figures? For now, Shawn Kemp's future remains uncertain. Whether he can overcome his legal battles and find redemption, or whether his career and legacy will forever be overshadowed by his criminal actions, remains to be seen. What is clear is that Kemp's fall from grace, from NBA All-Star to accused criminal, is a sad end to a once promising career. It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest challenges athletes face aren't on the court, but in their personal lives, where the price of fame can be far more costly than anyone expects. The NBA is widely celebrated for its incredible athletes and thrilling games, moments that have made us cheer, cry, and jump out of our seats. But as much as we love the game, we can't ignore the darker side of the sport. The players we look up to, who inspire millions, sometimes turn out to be individuals who make decisions that forever tarnish their careers. These players, whether through violent crimes, financial fraud, or other scandals, have added to a growing list of troubling incidents in the league's history. From locker room fights that turn into criminal cases to fraud schemes that rob millions, the NBA has had to contend with a number of unsavory stories. But it raises an important question: how much do we really know about the players we idolize? We celebrate their skills, their success, and their on-court personas, but when the cameras are off and the arena lights go out, how well do we know them as people? Do we understand the pressures they face, the personal struggles they endure, and the choices they make behind closed doors? The truth is, the stories of these players often reveal a side of the NBA that most of us never see. It's a reminder that while we may worship the game, the individuals who play it are flawed, human beings like everyone else. So, how has the NBA responded to these incidents? What measures has the league taken to address these issues, and how does it prevent such scandals from continuing? In response to these and other player controversies, the NBA has implemented stricter codes of conduct, imposed harsher penalties, and even increased mental health resources for players. The league has had to continuously confront its image, understanding that the actions of one player can have a ripple effect, damaging not just that player's career, but also the league's reputation as a whole. The players' unions also play a key role in how these situations are handled. While they fight for players' rights and protection, the union must also consider how to address the misconduct of those who cross the line. We've seen some players face suspensions, fines, and even permanent bans from the league, but the NBA's true challenge lies in balancing accountability with second chances. But what's most intriguing is the ongoing tension between the league's public image and its handling of these scandals. How does the NBA continue to position itself as a family-friendly product while dealing with real-life criminal behaviors among some of its most famous stars? The league's responses have evolved over time, but these stories remind us that the NBA, like any organization, faces the difficult task of handling both public relations and its internal culture. What do you think about these players? Did any of their stories shock you? How do you feel about the NBA's response to these scandals? Do you think the league does enough to address these issues, or could it do more? Let us know in the comments below. We want to hear your thoughts. Whether you agree or disagree, your perspective is important, and we love reading your feedback. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.